Karolina Olsson was born on October 29, 1861. She would be the second of 6 kids and the only girl. Hey everyone, before we get into this story, I want to apologize for any mispronunciations that will happen eventually on the way through this video. The Olssons were a religious family and even believed in things like witchcraft. The family owned and lived on a small farm in Ökno, Sweden. Karolina's early life was much like other girls of the time. She was kept at home to help her mother with the housework, and her mother taught her how to read and write. In the fall of 1875, Karolina began attending school that was a 6-kilometer walk away. It wasn't but a few months after she began school that her life would change drastically. In February of 1876, Karolina began suffering from a toothache, and during one of the walks home from school, fell and hit her head. She seemed to have recovered from the head injury quickly, but the toothache was another issue. On February 22nd, Karolina complained that her toothache was getting worse. Her family believed that Karolina's suffering was due to witchcraft and sent her to bed. The next morning, Karolina did not wake up at her usual time, and her family found it impossible to wake up the sleeping 14-year-old. They tried everything that they could think of, including sticking pins underneath her fingernails. The family did not have enough money to pay for a doctor to come see their daughter, so they relied on advice from friends, neighbors, and the town's midwife. To keep her from starving to death, Karolina's mother would force-feed her milk and sugar water twice a day. This is the reported diet Karolina would live off of throughout her illness. Eventually, finances were raised and a doctor visit was arranged. Dr. Johann Emil Ambalda, a respected doctor and skilled surgeon, came to see Karolina. He too was unable to wake her and came to the conclusion that she was in a coma. He would continue to visit Karolina throughout the year. The doctor wrote to the editor of a Scandinavian medical journal asking for the help of other professionals. Karolina was then visited by other doctors who took note that her hair and nails did not seem to grow, and that she hadn't seemed to have lost weight despite her diet being only milk and sugar water. Still, no one knew how to help Karolina. During her sleep, Karolina's brothers said they never saw her leave the bed. However, her father had. He said he had seen Karolina crawling on the floor a couple of times and even 3 times heard her speak. One time he saw her sit up in the bed and shout, quote, "Good Jesus, have mercy on me," end quote. But not in English. She then laid back down and pulled the blanket over her head. In her sleep, she would also mumble prayers that she had learned when she was a child. During the day, Karolina and her mother would be left alone in the house while her father and brothers were working outside. Karolina was finally hospitalized in Oskarshamn in July of 1892. At the time, the hospital was a 2-story building with 31 care units. Dr. Adolf Wilhelm Thorin, who worked at the hospital during Karolina's stay, had an interest in her illness. He believed he could cure her. She was in a stuporious-like condition, still not speaking, and insensitive to touch. During her time at the hospital, Karolina underwent electrotherapy, but her situation remained unchanged. A month after Karolina was hospitalized, she was discharged in the same condition she went in with. Her diagnosis was that of dementia paralytica. However, there isn't much evidence that this was her actual condition. After leaving the hospital, Karolina would not be examined by a doctor again while she was asleep. Tragedy struck the family in 1905 when Karolina's mother died. The family reported that Karolina was suffering from crying fits, but through these crying fits, she never woke up. Her father hired a housekeeper to help with the chores and caring for Karolina, and Karolina's diet of milk and sugar continued. However, Karolina would now be left in the house by herself during the day when everyone else was out tending to the farm. 2 years after losing her mother, one of Karolina's brothers drowned. It is reported that Karolina fell again into crying fits at this time, but again never woke up. On April 3rd of 1908, the housekeeper found Karolina on all fours crying and asking where her mother is. After 32 years and 42 days, the now 46-year-old Karolina had finally waken up. And when her brothers were called into the house, Karolina did not recognize them. Upon her awakening, she was described as looking very thin and pale, unlike how she looked when her mother was alive. She also did not look her age of 46, and looked more like she was in her late 20s or early 30s, depending on who was asked. Initially, Karolina had difficulty moving around, speaking, and had a sensitivity to light. However, she did have a good appetite. 3 days later, Karolina was visited by J.W. Goiger, the principal from the local school. It was found that Karolina could still read and write just as before. She did have some issues with math, she didn't know that much about Swedish history, and couldn't point to Stockholm on a map. Karolina's memory before her sleep remained intact. She was able to recall events like school and church visits. As soon as she felt strong enough, Karolina began helping with the household chores again. It wasn't long before the press caught wind of the newly awakened Karolina, and they began to travel from all over Europe to speak with her. The Olsons didn't care for the press attention and tried to avoid them. Karolina consented to psychiatric testing in Stockholm, where she was found to have full possession of her mental facilities that she had before she fell asleep. In 1910, psychiatrist Dr. Froderstrom met with Karolina and others to investigate what happened to her, using the lens of psychiatry. He would publish a paper of her condition in 1912 with his analysis. Dr. Froderstrom set to work talking with family members and authorities who encountered Karolina during her sleep. The doctor's work was going to be complicated, as during her sleep, Karolina was never examined by a trained psychiatrist, and the investigation started 2 years after she woke. Upon his first meeting with Karolina, he found her working on the household chores. He noted that she looked significantly younger than her actual age, and that after an examination he found nothing abnormal about her, save for her underdeveloped muscles. He also noted that she answered his questions without hesitation. His findings showed no abnormalities reported before the sleep. There was also no documentation on the mother-daughter relationship before the illness. However, it was documented that during her sleep, Karolina's mother showed a great tenderness and care towards her daughter. It could even be described as overprotection. During his interview with the housekeeper hired after Karolina's mother passed, she revealed several curious things to him. She had stated that she never saw urine or menstrual blood stains on the bed that Karolina slept in, and that Karolina's hair and nails were always clean. Although she did say that Karolina was bedridden from 1905 to 1908, she did say that if caramels were left by Karolina, they would disappear when no one was looking, unlike when food was left by her. I just wanted to interject something right here. I do want to state that sleep eating is a real thing that can really happen. The housekeeper also told him that she often noticed that some things would be moved around in the room when she would come back in from working outside. She stated that she never heard Karolina speak, but heard her crying or moaning sometimes. Dr. Froderstrom asserted that Karolina's illness stemmed from her mind. Although he was working with incomplete evidence 34 years after Karolina first went to sleep, he suggested that her diagnosis was that of catatonia, stupor, with negativism. That is, catatonia with no psychomotor activity or interaction with the environment, the stupor part, as well as with no response to instruction or external stimuli, the negativism part. He made a case that due to all the stressors Karolina endured, such as starting school during the harsher seasons, the possibility of the onset of puberty, being separated from her mother, whom she might have had a close relationship with, and the painful toothache, all during a sensitive age, caused her mind to put her in this state. She might have convinced herself she was more ill than she actually was. It also could have been a way for her mother to protect her from the evils of the world. He supposed that, Karolina being the only girl, she may have been a more special child to her mother. He held speculation that the two may have been in on it together. If they were or were not aware of it consciously is unknown. Dr. Froderstrom also suspected that after Karolina's mother's death, Karolina began to feed herself while everyone was out of the house, and that this would be the time that she would relieve herself as well as clean herself. He says she probably awoke because it became too difficult without her mother to fake being asleep, that it would have been less attractive to continue the fraud when her protector was gone, and therefore she looked for a way to give up the alleged illness without embarrassment. Dr. Froderstrom was influenced by Professor Gaedelius. In his textbook, Professor Gaedelius states that the age of catatonia manifestation is anywhere from 25 to 35 years of age, meaning that Dr. Froderstrom's analysis of Karolina wouldn't align with this given age range. Karolina lived for another 42 years after she awoke. She died in 1950 at the age of 88 from an intracranial hemorrhage. It's hard to say with 100% certainty what happened to Karolina that made her sleep for 32 years, whether it be an organic illness, a mental illness, or even fraud. We'll probably never know for sure. Thank you guys for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did so, please leave a like. Let me know in the comment section below what you think was up with Karolina. And if you're not subscribed to my channel, you should. And if you are subscribed, thank you very much for being a subscriber. But anyways, that's enough from me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!